polling has kind of tightened in recent days when it comes to Liberals v Conservatives. So give us the lay of the land. Trudeau called for this election thinking it seemed to be like a slam dunk for him. It's not looking that way thus far.
Wow. I mean, for someone who said that you don't know much about the election, that was pretty much all I had to say. That's a good summary.
Oh, okay. See you later.
Yeah. Okay. I blew my one shot on the majority report to be the resident expert of anything. So for any of your viewers who don't know, Canada is not a made-up cartoon. It's a real country. It's just to the north of you. And we actually do a lot of cartoonish things. Like we have a parliamentary system here, similar to every other old colony. And we still have the Queen as our head of state, which is also kind of silly. But part of this parliamentary system and the way it works is that you basically don't get to vote for your prime minister. I don't get to write down that I want to vote for, say, Jagmeet Singh, who I would probably vote for had I been given the choice. What you do is you vote for your local MPs in your area, and then all the MPs kind of team up together, kind of like a Captain Planet style or Power Rangers or whatever metaphor you want. And then if you get enough seats, aka enough MPs, you get to form the government. The magic number is 170. So if you get 170 MPs in your party, then they form the majority government, and they can basically rule with an iron fist, which is what Trudeau got to do for a little while until he lost his majority government and has had a minority government. When you have a minority government, you have to either do deals with like-minded parties, and it actually works out a lot better because you don't have this kind of like either one party enacting authoritarian, not authoritarian, but as close as you'll get in Canada, unilateral rule. They have to work together with other parties, which kind of helps out. Is kind of the advantage, in my opinion, of a parliamentary system over kind of what you have in America, which is the two-party pendulum swing effect kind of stuff.
Gotcha. So what, I guess, what were the reasonings for Trudeau calling this election? It seems like probably it was based on the COVID response. Vaccination rates were high very quickly in Canada. You guys outpaced us, even though you were behind for quite a while.
I can explain that.
So explain that to me. Why did Trudeau call this election?
Power.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah. But what? Okay.
I know it, but
what were the headwinds? Yeah, like was it the COVID response?
So basically, at the time, the polling and most of the, I would say, intelligentsia was showing that Trudeau is pretty poised to win a majority government within this small time frame. So one of the things about a snap election in Canada is, unlike the US, which is kind of just a perpetual election cycle, this whole thing, as you can tell, wraps up very quickly. Like it was announced and in a month it's going to be over. So Trudeau's idea was that right now we're doing very, very well for a lot of reasons. And unfortunately, not all the reasons are because of Trudeau. Once COVID started, basically Canada's answer to COVID was similar to a lot of other countries where it's like, we need to lock down. You need to stay in your homes. Don't touch each other. No more, glory holes or whatever it is that you were doing. And what we should all do is just, stay indoors. And, if you can, work at home. If you can't, we need some safety net, some sort of a safety net, right? Similar to the one-time $2,000 checks that y'all got and then the $1,400 checks after. So this is where having a parliamentary system works, because Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, they're basically the lefty party in Canada. They're the workers' party. They're typically very for unions, worker cooperatives, increasing pharmacare rights, dental care rights, stuff like that, stuff that all lefties kind of get on board with. They were the ones who pressured Trudeau and said to Justin Trudeau, hey, by the way, you need to enact this program. Canadians are going to need some form of a UBI to get us through this. That became what was known as CERB. So under that program for about 7 to 8 months, any Canadian who wanted would just log into a website. You wouldn't have to go through any vetting process. You just click I agree, and you would get $2,000 in your bank account every month while COVID was going down. It obviously, it was incredible, saved a lot of lives. I had a lot of friends who were on it. And it was necessary, because how else are you supposed to spend hours at home not working and also buy food and pay rent, right? It doesn't work out. So that was an enormously popular program, which did very well for the Liberals, even though it was in large part due to the NDP forcing them to do that because they didn't want to. So that's one thing that he went into this election thinking, but that's very popular. The second one being what Emma already mentioned, of course, is the vaccines. Now, Canada's beating America in the vaccine race isn't because of good old fashioned smiles, maple syrup, or whatever the press has been telling you. It's entirely because of riches and greed. What Trudeau essentially did is realize we're a very wealthy nation. We no longer have a vaccine production capability in this country because conservatives gutted it years ago. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy it from poor nations and wealthy nations. So we bought a whole bunch from you, America, but then we also bought a whole bunch from this global reserve, which is intended to be used for the poorest countries in the world, developing countries, to be able to get emergency vaccines in a case like this. We bought from that emergency pool as well, with the idea that we're not actually as evil as this sounds. We're going to replace them once we're all vaccinated, kind of thing down the road. But combined with all the sources and the fact that Canada is a wealthy nation, it's very oil wealthy, right? We just bought all the vaccines we needed and got everyone vaccinated.
So, how was that even possible? How was Canada even able to maneuver that and just say, oh, yeah, we'll put more in this repository later? Seems like that should be disallowed given, I don't know, GDP.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that happen globally that I don't think should be permitted that seem to be fine, depending on how much wealth and capital you can exude. I can't answer that question genuinely from a legal standpoint. I'm not sure. I'm assuming everything was above board. It wasn't done in secret. It was very public, and it was also one of those things where Trudeau was kind of like, I don't want y'all to feel guilty about any of these decisions. Sorry. Got a puppy running through my legs while I'm on live air. I don't want y'all to feel guilty about these decisions. I want y'all to just understand that we intend fully on helping out other nations and replacing these in due time once we have the ability to do so. But again, it's kind of like, it's all these things that were making Trudeau popular. He saw this as an opportunity to, like, it's a snap election called solely for the purpose of him getting a majority back, because he doesn't like to work with other parties. He doesn't like to work with the NDP. The NDP right now has been fighting him for months for things that seem on the surface level to be commonplace. Like, can we have more paid sick leave days? Can we have more mat leave days? Can we have more pat leave days? Can we please, like, the NDP proposed this proposal, and I'm sure everyone on the show will agree with this kind of idea. What if during this pandemic, we have a situation where the richest Canadians have made an obscene amount of wealth, just like the richest Americans, just like the richest Europeans, just like every other billionaire onward has made an obscene amount of wealth? Can we tax them from now on at 1%, for all their accrued wealth? And this is to the tune of anyone who makes more than $20 million or has more than $20 million in assets, we just tax them 1% to pay for the rest of the country, for the poorest Canadians, for the homeless Canadians, for those who are jobless, just for all the stuff we need right now under COVID. Does not seem controversial, right? And it was overwhelmingly approved of by Canadians. Canadians were like, yeah, this makes sense. If you have more than $20 million in assets, you should have to pay your fair share. And the Liberals shut it down. I mean, the Conservatives shut it down as well, but that goes without saying. But it's just one of those things, like, Trudeau didn't want to keep putting up with these proposals where it makes Jagmeet Singh look very good. The NDP looks very good. They're like, yeah, let's tax the wealthy to pay for everybody kind of programs. He wants to have a majority again, basically.
So essentially, he wants to toe this line by taking credit for the policy sets that he was pressured into putting in place by the NDP, while also calling the snap election in order to neutralize them and take back a more moderate Liberal majority. Yeah,
I would say that's a very fair condensed assessment of it. But I mean, if someone was here who was a Trudeau supporter, they'd probably be like, that's hogwash. Okay, there's so many more factors at play. But I mean, if you're just looking at a very Coles Notes version, that's what I would say is accurate.
Oh, there's a reason that I didn't have a Trudeau supporter on the show, though, to talk about. So I appreciate your assessment. Let's talk a little bit more about Trudeau and his relationship with the Indigenous population in Canada, because I think that's gotten a lot of attention due to his green lighting of pipelines. And now here in the United States, we're talking about Line 3. Not enough. I want to talk about it more, honestly, because it's yet another instance of this prioritization of gas that's homegrown in North America, so we can reduce our dependence on Saudi oil by just supplementing it with our own, and tribal lands be damned and rights of Native people be damned. That's been quite a controversy from the left in Canada. Trudeau hasn't reckoned with this in really any meaningful way, is my understanding. If you could talk a little bit more about that fight from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Trudeau has been an absolute wizard, I would say, at his ability to make it appear on the surface as if he's actually on board with a lot of popular causes. If anything, he's really good at taking populist movements and then absorbing them into this kind of corporate liberal machine to make it more sanitized. So he'll do press ops. Recently, there's been a bunch of discoveries of unmarked mass graves of children who died in residential schools in Canada, and he'll show up to them and he'll kneel and he'll lean on one knee and he'll place flowers or wear an orange shirt, and the tear will go down the face. And he's been doing this for as long as I've known Trudeau. He's very good at the optics of politics, whereas the actual policies themselves are usually pretty abysmal. While he's doing that, while he's kneeling on the one knee and while he's, the single tear is going down the face for the press op, he has been actively suing residential school survivors in court in order to prevent them from getting what I would consider to be just dues for their treatment as survivors under this program, to the tune of $100 million. It's not a Dr. Evil figure. It's like, there's no joke there. Like it's horrifying, but that's what he'll do behind the scenes while, publicly saying this is atrocious. How could we have committed cultural genocide? I'm so ashamed of my country kind of stuff. He's got a really long history of doing those kind of things. Now, I don't want to completely 100% say that Trudeau has been abysmal for Indigenous rights. He has in fact been better than, say, some of his predecessors. And he has put a lot of stuff to the forefront. Like, for example, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission started before Trudeau came into power, but the findings of the commission came out while Trudeau was in power. And if you don't know what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, it's the largest study, academic study ever done. It was funded by the government. It cost millions of dollars to do. It interviewed thousands upon thousands of residential school survivors, as well as other academics and academia, ex-police officers, ex-nuns and priests, to find out what was the situation in the history of Canada and how did this affect the people. And the findings were what conclusively determined that this was, in fact, genocide. It came from their own words. And then here's a whole bunch of calls to action in order to change the course of history that we're going down. Very few of those calls to action have been implemented. And a handful of them could have been done under Trudeau. I think some of the worst ones was one of Trudeau's big campaign promises was to clean up all drinking water on reserves in Canada. So for those who aren't familiar, Canada has a reserve system for Indigenous peoples in which they'll usually take a whole bunch of different cultures and languages and entire societies, and they put them all, historically they would squeeze them all together in these small plots of land that were typically very far away from mainstream Canadian society. So they had a lot of difficulty finding jobs, obviously, because they were remote. They had a lot of difficulty with, obviously, drug abuse and alcoholism because the living conditions were deplorable. That added to the fact that the Canadian government was literally taking their children out of their arms and forcing them into schools where they were tortured, beaten, and sexually abused and stuff like that. So the whole thing is a mess, and it's almost entirely because of the actions of the federal government towards these people at the time. Taking that all in, Trudeau has a very good opportunity to make a lot of these situations right by improving the living conditions currently in today's day and age in reserves. There's still 54 reserves in Canada that don't have potable water, as in the drinking water in those areas cannot be drank without boiling or finding it from a third-party source, which you would think is something you would hear in a country that wasn't nearly as rich as Canada. And yes, it's an incredibly complicated topic to say how do you exactly fix that, but it's still something that was made as a campaign promise way back before he was even elected in his first run. So, I mean, if in summary, if you were asking me what is Trudeau's relationship with Indigenous people, I would say it's very largely performative more than anything.
It seems that way. And you're right to heap all that criticism onto him and also say, well, he's been better than his predecessors. He's also been better than in the United States, any president. We don't have any equivalent Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the residential schools we had here in this country. So the fact that he's fighting these survivors or the families of the survivors in court is unconscionable, but, again, not necessarily something that we in the United States have like to stand on.
If I could just put one little pin in that thought, though, Trudeau didn't start the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That was actually started before Trudeau took power. He just basically didn't fight the results of the findings, right? Whereas I would say Stephen Harper was actively working to suppress other things that were going on within Indigenous discovery at the time.
Well, gotcha. Okay, so bare minimum.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
So the Conservatives are gaining momentum, at least in polling. That's what it seems to be indicating. What are they proposing? What is their line of attack against Trudeau in the snap election?
So I both want to make people a little less afraid, because right now I'm getting a ton of emails from people saying, because our equivalent of Nate Silver over here in Canada is called 338. So if anyone wants to see the up and coming polls and projections, go to 338canada.com. But if you go there, you'll see at the very top, the federal vote for, projection, which means how people are going to vote federally, is showing the Conservatives and the Liberals at a deadlock heat, with the Conservatives starting to surpass the Liberals, which is a nightmare scenario for everybody, right? No one wants the Conservatives in power. I would rather the Liberals stay in power as a minority with the NDP to push up against them and make them more lefty. What you should be more worried about and concentrate on is the federal seat projection, because that's all that matters. So it's very misleading for people right now to be like, well, the Conservatives are taking the lead. If you look at the federal seat projection, which is all that matters, again, how many seats are people going to have? They still have the Liberals in a decided lead. So the Liberals are still projected to get 141, which is a minority, the Conservatives with 133, and then the NDP with 36.3. Obviously, the people who've done the best in this election so far have been the NDP. They've gone up a lot since their last election. But sorry, to answer your question, what are Conservatives proposing? The Conservatives are led by a man named Aaron O'Toole, and pause for jokes. All right.
Apt.
Yes. He's an odd fellow. He tried to do this thing where he was going to rebrand the Conservatives as being a little bit more progressive and as being a little bit more modern, and that backfired horrifically, because clearly they didn't want that. So he tried to make it part of the Conservative Party platform just to admit that climate change is real. Not that they are committing to doing anything about it, not that they are willing to say that, like, it's man-made or anything, but just to admit that climate change is real and active, and we should acknowledge that. That was one of his party proposals that did not go through, like in the last Conservative board. It's very strange. So he has tried to do this mix of modernizing them. And if you didn't know, Canada, because we have so many potential parties, we have a new one that started in the last election called the PPC. The PPC is Canada's answer to, I don't know, far right anti-immigration sentiment-esque, if you could picture that in a party. They're like a splinter from the Conservative Party, but they're gaining a little bit of momentum. They have like 3.5% projected seats. So they're siphoning off some of the worst parts of the Conservatives, I guess, from the Conservative Party. Outside of that, the big plans that Aaron O'Toole's laying out are they're frighteningly populist. I will say that. He recently put something out there that I just immediately on the surface love the idea of, and that is that every major corporation in Canada, once they reach a certain size, needs to have a worker's voice at the CEO board, which is odd to hear from a Conservative party, and I'm sure you're all surprised. And then a whole bunch of academics in Canada looked into it and found out that the whole thing was purely ceremonial. Like, what he's proposing would mean that, like, once or twice a year, the workers would be able to sit at the CEO board, and that would be nice and fun. But the whole thing is like, show off your kids at kindergarten kind of things. It's like, it doesn't mean there's any agreement towards they have to listen to them. There's no bargaining power. This could be done in lieu of, say, like unionization, in lieu of actually having worker bargaining power in the workplace. Instead, you just get to sit at the table once a year and be like, all right, so what do you think? How are you liking your job? And then you can be like, oh, well, we don't enjoy pissing and shitting in bags. That's kind of been terrible. So can we stop doing that? You're like, oh, nice, neat. All right. Round of applause, everybody. Look, they did it. They did it. Great. All right. We'll see you in a year. Yeah. Thanks. Good. Nice to see you. Kind of stuff like that. Stuff that, like, really scares me, because you get that sentiment from people like Tucker Carlson, who are pushing for populist ideas. And the more I see that coming from the right, the more frightening it can become. So he's been a mix of that, a mix of we're going to build way more homes for Canadians, even though at the current measure, I think Canada has 6 empty homes for every person housed. So, I mean, the supply and demand is not as much of an issue as the class and economics is. But yeah, typical Conservative stuff.
Right. And so for the NDP, where do they stand going into this election on the 20th?
So the NDP, and I'm going to have to admit to my bias here, because I'm working on the sidelines trying to get Indigenous NDP members elected. So I'm going to give a shout out to Breen Ouellette, who's one of the first Indigenous I think if he gets elected, he'll be the first Indigenous MP from Central Vancouver. So I'm helping with this campaign on Saturday. The NDP have been very forthcoming about wanting radical and drastic change, especially at a time like now. Jagmeet Singh is the first MP to formally announce that their official policy is to end all oil subsidies, kind of like day one kind of thing. So there's not going to be any more subsidization, for the oil industry in Canada, which would be massive. I mean, as soon as COVID started, I believe we gave the tar sands oil industry close to $10 billion in bailouts. I could be a little bit off on that number, but still, for a company that's already making record profits, entering COVID, you don't think that that's something that me as a taxpayer would want to put my money towards, but there it is. So that's one of the big things. Today, they promised universal pharmacare. And I know that might be odd to Americans to hear, but Canada does have a public healthcare system. We have the same one as you, Medicaid or Is it Medicare or Medicaid? Which one starts at 65? It's
Medicare,
Medicaid, right?
Medicare. Medicaid is for
seniors.
disabled. No,
okay,
Medicare is for seniors. Yeah.
Okay, so we have the same system, except instead of at 65, it starts at 0, which is basically the biggest difference, right? But it goes by the same name. But most people don't realize in Canada that it doesn't really cover the neck up. And by which I mean anything that happens to your mouth, there's no dental care. Anything that happens to your eyes, there's no eye care. And when it comes to mental health care, there's a very long waiting list typically. And then what will usually happen is if you have something extreme, like I've had friends who are schizophrenic, they will be seen immediately by a healthcare worker, but they'll try to just give them which drugs work and try to do that drug combination rather than let's sit you down with a counselor, a psychiatrist, stuff like that. So Jagmeet has come out and said that he's now going to push for full pharmacare programs. He's in the past tried to push for dental care programs, but they've been shut down by the Liberals for a variety of reasons. So he's going very strong into those, very pro-environment, very pro-worker. Yeah, it's basically most of the things you'd probably be looking for in terms of aligning yourself with leftist politics. Now, the criticism that you're probably going to get is that we have provinces in Canada the same way you have states in the US, and the provincial NDP is very different than the federal NDP. And the provincial NDP in where I live, British Columbia, has been abhorrent. Especially because there's now the deforestation going on in northern BC, as well as old growth forests, and they're being protected once again by Indigenous people. Usually seems that when it comes to the clash with the environment, it's Indigenous people who are at the front lines trying to protect it. And the NDP is just basically not respecting any of their sovereign rights or, land back titles or stuff like that. So the BC NDP, I cannot vouch for them. They're pretty bad. The Alberta NDP cannot vouch for them. They're pretty bad. As of what I've seen so far, federally, Jagmeet Singh is the best option personally for me that I've seen. The next parties would be the Bloc Québécois. There's not much to say about them except they're separatists, so it doesn't really apply unless you are someone interested in separating and becoming your own autonomous country in Quebec. And then there's the Green Party, which it's weird because y'all have Green in the US, and the Green Party in the US sometimes is good. The Green Party in Canada is very strange. It's
the Green Party in the US is not that
mixed bag. Let's say.
Yeah, let's
Okay. Can you tell me a bit about the US Green Party, and then maybe I can see how it differs?
Well, it's not really a thing, and it's a lot of cranks who.
Well, I mean,
are disaffected.
The main problem is I have no problem against a third party, but the main issue seems to be it's focused as a media operation during presidential campaign season to run basically like presidential candidates and disregard any sort of more local power attainment and basically start at the top, which I think we've seen. Look, it'd be nice if it would have worked, but I think we've seen the outcome of that experiment at this point. Okay,
well, very similar. Well, I mean, their answer to a lot of the climate stuff has been very pro-capitalism, as in we can solve these issues if we just funnel more corporate power into green energy power, kind of options like that. And I'm not saying that there isn't it's like the climate disaster is such a multifaceted issue that you need to approach it from a variety of different means. But I'm just saying the Green Party is often bizarre in their approach to it. And as of right now, they're self-imploding. They've got a very big problem where there's a mix of racism, anti-Semitism, attacking their own elected leader and trying to get their own elected leader ousted. This is happening right before an election was called. So at the moment, the Greens are kind of in self-implosion mode. So I would say for tenable political parties. It's basically the big three right now. And like I said, there is that weird, super racist one that is funneling votes away from the Conservatives at the same time.
Gotcha. Well, what do people need to know ahead of this election in terms of, strategy, what you'd recommend, just to wrap this up?
Sure. As of right now, the election is still pretty far away. I know Canada operates kind of like in dog years to human years in relation to the US. So even though it seems like it's very close and we got, a mere 23 or 24 days away from it or something like that, it's still a very long time in terms of election time in Canada. A lot is going to happen. What you're going to see is like giddy up. There's going to be a lot of scandals. They're all being kept close to the chest right now. It was I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before the last election where we learned about Trudeau's love for blackface. So he may have other proclivities that we're unaware of that will, see the light of day as the weeks come closer. But you're probably going to see that typical roller coaster that you're seeing right now, which is the Liberals will begin to sink and wonder, what did they ever do to deserve this? And at the same time, the Conservatives will rise, and then it'll become very scary because it's like, are we just going to lose the Liberal minority and trade it for Conservative minority instead? I would say if you want to be active in this, if you're Canadian, or even if you aren't, because this is something that definitely affects you. Canada is one of the world's largest oil producers. We produce an obscene amount of bitumen, especially from the tar sands, and it's one of the most destructive and wasteful ways to produce energy. So it's something that you want to get involved with, then please check out your local MPs. It's like anything else. It probably will make a lot bigger difference if you try to approach this election locally than if you try to approach it from the sum totality. Like I have to get Jagmeet Singh or Justin Trudeau elected. That's it. And if I don't do that, nothing's going to happen. Like at a local level, you could probably affect and this goes for all politics, really. You can affect a lot more change at a local level than you could at a large level. So yeah. And also please support all the Indigenous candidates who are running. Most of them are running for the NDP right now. And I'll be working with Breen Ouellette this weekend to try and get him elected as well.
Well, Lance from the Serfs, thank you so much, Lance. Really appreciate your time today, and everyone should check out the Serfs.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.